I love you, Claire, but steal one more garlic knot, and this friendship is over. Everyone laughed. Noah laughed too. That was the plan. Say it like a joke. Hide it like always. Survive another night. Then he saw her face. Claire wasn't laughing. Her cheeks were burning red. Her eyes locked onto his with an expression he had never once seen in 11 years. She stepped closer, close enough that nobody else could hear. Her fingers closed around his wrist beneath the table. And she whispered, "What?" "Say it again." 11 years of hiding. 11 years of jokes and deflections and careful, perfect silence. One whisper just ended all of it. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. I want to tell you about the night a stupid joke about a garlic knot blew up 11 years of careful, deliberate, exhausting silence. But before I get to the garlic knot, I need to tell you about Marcus. Because Marcus is the reason everything finally broke open. Marcus is the reason I stopped hiding. And if you've ever swallowed something true for so long that it started tasting like poison, you'll understand exactly why a man with a beer in his hand and contempt in his voice was the thing that finally undid me. His name was Marcus Hale. Claire had been dating him for about 4 months. 4 months that had felt to me like swallowing glass, one small piece at a time, every single day. He was tall, presentable, the kind of guy who knew how to work a room handsome in that effortless way that made you assume he'd never had to try very hard at anything. And he hadn't. That was the problem. Marcus had never had to try hard at anything, including Claire. I noticed it early. The way he'd check his phone while she was mid-sentence. The way he'd correct her stories in front of other people, not aggressively, but with this quiet, surgical precision that left her slightly smaller each time. That's not exactly how it happened, babe. Little things. The kind of things that are almost impossible to point at without sounding jealous or petty, or his favorite word, when it came to me, obsessive. Your friend Noah is a little obsessive, don't you think? I'd overheard him say that to Claire 3 weeks into their relationship. We were at her apartment, and I was in the kitchen refilling glasses, and his voice carried more than he realized. He texts you constantly. He shows up constantly. It's a little much. And Claire had said quietly, "He's my best friend. He's been my best friend for 11 years. And Marcus had said, "Sure, but at some point, doesn't that start looking like something else?" I'd stood in that kitchen for a long moment, ice clinking softly in the glasses, and I had thought, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. And that's the worst part. Because he wasn't wrong. It did look like something else. It was something else. It had been something else for 11 years, and I had dressed it up in every disguise I could find: jokes, favors, dependability, humor, and convinced myself and everyone around me that what I felt was simply the natural intensity of a very deep friendship. I was very good at convincing people of things. I was especially good at convincing myself. So when my sister Rachel's engagement party rolled around on a warm Saturday evening in late September, I showed up with Claire beside me, the way I always showed up everywhere, the two of us so synchronized that Rachel's future mother-in-law pulled me aside within 20 minutes of arrival and said, "Oh, you two are just precious. How long have you been married?" "We're not," I said. She blinked, looked at Claire, looked back at me. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure," I said. And I laughed, and it was the laugh I'd been perfecting for 11 years, easy, self-deprecating. The laugh of a man who found the question charming and faintly absurd, rather than the laugh of a man who, every single time he heard it, felt the question land directly in the center of his chest, like a well-aimed stone. Claire had heard the exchange from 2 feet away. She caught my eye and gave me a small, sympathetic smile. The kind of smile that said, "Sorry, I know this happens all the time. I know it's annoying." And I smiled back with my practiced smile, the one that said, "No worries, it's just funny. It doesn't mean anything." We were very good at lying to each other without technically lying. The party was loud and warm, and full of the easy chaos that comes with 2 families officially merging. My sister was radiant, genuinely, incandescently happy in a way that made my chest ache a little, not out of envy exactly, but out of something adjacent to it, something that felt like standing outside a window in the cold, watching a fire burn inside a room you can see but cannot enter. Claire was beside me at the food table when it happened. I had a plate. A good plate carefully assembled over 3 trips because I take party food very seriously and do not apologize for that. Bruschetta. Mini caprese skewers. And at the center of the plate, The prize. The reason I'd elbowed gently past 4 people. 2 garlic knots, golden and glistening, warm enough that the butter was still softening against them. I had been looking forward to those garlic knots for approximately 20 minutes. I turned to grab a napkin. When I turned back, one of them was gone. I looked at my plate. I looked at Claire. She was chewing, deliberately, maintaining full, unflinching eye contact with me, the way she always did when she was doing something she knew was wrong and had decided to own it completely. Claire, I said. She said, chewing. Did you just take my garlic knot? I don't know what you're talking about. You're chewing it right now. I'm chewing something, she said serenely. Could be anything. Around us, a small cluster of guests had tuned in. My sister's friend Dana, who had been watching with anthropological interest for years, was already grinning. Rachel, standing 6 feet away, had turned to watch with her champagne glass halfway to her lips. Claire Morgan, I said, pointing my fork at her with what I intended to be severity, and which probably looked nothing like severity at all. I love you, but if you steal one more garlic knot, this friendship is over. The table erupted in laughter. Dana said, there it is. Rachel said finally. Somebody's uncle I'd never met said, just date her already, son. And there was more laughter. And it was all the familiar, comfortable, well-worn theater of it. The joke that everyone expected. The punchline that everyone knew was coming. The performance that I had been giving, in one form or another, for 11 years. Except Claire wasn't laughing. She had gone very still. I noticed it, the way you notice a sound stopping, rather than starting an absence that was louder than presence. Her face, which had been bright and slightly flushed, with the warmth of the party and the wine she'd been nursing, had shifted into something I didn't have a word for. Her cheeks were red, but not from laughing. Her eyes had gone serious, in a way that sent something cold and electric straight down the back of my neck. She stepped closer to me. Just half a step. Enough to close the small distance between us so that the conversation was ours and no longer the table's. And she said very quietly, what? I blinked. What? What you just said. Her voice was low, careful, like she was handling something fragile. Say it again. The laughter around us was already moving on, finding a new target, spilling into new conversations. Nobody was watching anymore except my sister, who had not moved and whose champagne was still hovering motionless halfway to her mouth. I said, Claire, I know what you were just, she said. She was not backing away. She was not laughing this off. Her hand came up and her fingers closed, gently, around my wrist, not gripping, not demanding, just there, present. I know it was a joke. I'm asking you to say it again anyway. I looked at her. In 11 years, I had gotten very good at looking at Claire in a way that communicated nothing dangerous. I had learned the angle of the glance, the precise degree of warmth that reads as friendly, rather than desperately, hopelessly in love with you. I had calibrated that glance the way a sailor calibrates a compass, carefully, repeatedly, with the full understanding that the wrong degree of deviation could sink the whole ship. I had not calibrated for this. For her asking me to say it again, with her fingers on my wrist, and her eyes doing what they were currently doing. It was a joke, I said. But my voice came out quieter than I intended it. Quieter and less certain. Was it, she said. And there it was. The question I had spent 11 years avoiding. The single question I had engineered my entire personality around, never having to answer directly. Was any of it a joke? The long nights at the diner. The way I showed up to every hard thing without being asked. The way I'd spent 6 months driving her to her mother's medical appointments, sitting in waiting fin rooms with bad coffee and fluorescent lighting, holding her hand in hospital corridors at 11 o'clock at night while she cried quietly into my shoulder, and I told her everything was going to be okay. Was it a joke, Claire, I said, and my voice had a quality I didn't fully recognize. Raw around the edges, like something that had been kept in a box for a long time, and was now, for the first time in years, exposed to actual air. Was it, she said again. Not pushing, not aggressive, just asking. Just standing there with her hand on my wrist, and her eyes asking the question that her voice was only barely articulating. I said, we should probably go somewhere that isn't. I gestured vaguely at the party around us. Yes, she said immediately. Yes, we should. We slipped away from the table without ceremony, out through the side gate of Rachel's backyard, and around to the front porch, which was dim and quiet, lit only by a single yellow bulb that turned everything the color of old photographs. I could still hear music from the party, the low murmur of voices, the distant bright sound of someone laughing at something. Claire leaned against the porch railing. I stood a few feet away. For a moment, neither of us said anything, and the silence had a texture to it, thick and waiting, and charged with 11 years of everything I had never said. "Tell me the truth," she said, just like that, no preamble. No softening. Not a joke, not a deflection. "Tell me the actual truth." I looked at her, in the yellow light of that porch, and I thought about all the ways I had answered this question over the years without answering it. The jokes. The well-timed subject changes. The way I could read a room and redirect a conversation with the efficiency of a professional illusionist. I had been so good at it. So careful. So committed to the idea that keeping Claire as my best friend was worth the sacrifice, including this one, including 11 years of this one. I said, "Yes, what?" "Yes," I said. "It wasn't a joke. It's never been a joke. I have loved you since junior year of college, Claire. Since the night you stayed 2 hours late at the bookstore to help me reorganize the literature section, and you argued with me about whether Steinbeck or Hemingway had the better prose style, and you got so heated about it that you knocked an entire shelf of books onto the floor and then stood there laughing at yourself. And I thought, I stopped. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth for a second. I thought, that's it, that's her, that's the person. And I have spent 11 years being very, very careful not to ruin it. She was quiet for a long moment. I waited. The music from the party drifted around the corner of the house. Somewhere down the street a dog was barking. "Why?" she finally said. "Why didn't you ever just?" "Because you mattered more than what I wanted," I said. "Because I watched what happened with Derek in sophomore year, and I watched what happened with that guy you dated in grad school, the one who made you feel like you were always too much. And every time something went wrong, I was the person you called. And Claire, I would rather be the person you call when something goes wrong forever than be the reason something went wrong." She had been watching me the whole time I was talking. Now she looked away, out toward the dark street, and I could see something moving across her face that I didn't know how to read. "You were afraid," she said, "not an accusation, just a fact." Stated plainly, I was terrified, I said, every single day. I was terrified. She turned back to me, and in the yellow light of that porch, her eyes were bright, in a way that had nothing to do with the overhead bulb. "You know what the most frustrating part of this is?" she said. "Tell me." "You were already my best friend," she said. "You had already given me everything that mattered. You were already the person I wanted to tell everything to. You were already the first call and the last call, and the person I looked for in a crowd." She shook her head very slowly. "You didn't have to cut your heart in half to stay one." The sentence hit me somewhere behind my sternum, and just stayed there. "Claire, I'm not done," she said, and her voice cracked, just slightly, just enough for me to hear. "I need you to understand that when I say you were already my best friend, I'm not saying that to make you feel better about the 11 years. I'm saying it because somewhere in the middle of my mom getting sick, something shifted for me, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I didn't say anything either. So we're both idiots, Noah. We're both complete idiots." I stared at her. "What are you saying?" She took a breath. "I'm saying that there was a night about 3 months ago when you showed up at the hospital at midnight because I'd called you crying, and I couldn't even explain why. And you sat with me for 4 hours, and you didn't say anything wise or useful or profound. You were there. And on the drive home, you bought me terrible vending machine coffee, and you said, completely deadpan, that you were fairly certain the vending machine had never actually contained real coffee and was in fact filled with reconstituted sadness. And I laughed. I laughed in a hospital lot at midnight, and I thought." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "What did you think?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I thought, why am I not kissing him?" She said it fast, like ripping off a bandage. "I thought, why have I never kissed him?" And then I convinced myself I was just tired and emotional, and that you'd laugh at me if I tried, so I didn't. And I went home and I didn't sleep, and I told myself I'd gotten confused in a stressful moment. She paused. "I'd been telling myself that for 3 months. Tonight when you said that, when you said I love you, even as a joke," she exhaled slowly, "I couldn't tell myself I was confused anymore." I crossed the porch in 2 steps. I was not a man who moved quickly toward things. I had spent 11 years moving very deliberately away from this exact moment. But I crossed that porch in 2 steps, and I stopped right in front of her, close enough that I had to look slightly down to meet her eyes. And I said, "Can I?" And she said yes before I'd finished the sentence. I touched her face, both hands gently, the way you handle something you've been waiting a long time to hold without breaking. And I asked, because it mattered to me. Because it had always mattered to me. Are you sure? Noah, she said, with a sound that was almost laughter, but also definitely something else entirely. I have been waiting 3 months. Please just, I kissed her. It was not the kind of kiss I had imagined in the abstract, dim carefully, not quite imagined way. I'd been not quite imagining it for years. It was better than that, and it was more frightening than that, and it was softer than I expected, and it lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and when we separated, I was holding her face, and she was holding my wrists, and her eyes were wet. Say it again, she whispered. The same words, but nothing like the first time. The first time was a question. This was something else. I love you, Claire, I said. And there was no joke in it. No performance, no armor. Just the truth, finally, 11 years old and still alive, standing on my sister's front porch in the yellow light with both of us, slightly overwhelmed by the discovery that the thing we'd been most afraid of losing had been, all along, the thing we'd been most afraid to reach for. She exhaled, a long, slow, shaky exhale, and she rested her forehead against mine. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I said. Okay, she said again. And then I'm starving. Can we go to Millie's? I laughed. I actually laughed, not my performed laugh, not my careful laugh, but the real one, the one that came from somewhere low and genuine and surprised. We just had one of the most significant conversations of our lives, and you want to go to a diner. It's almost 10 o'clock, Noah. I haven't eaten properly since lunch, and someone stole my dinner. You stole my garlic knot, and now I'd like a proper meal. She pulled back enough to look at me. Her eyes were still bright, but her smile was returning. Cautious and real, and exactly the smile I had been carefully not cataloging for 11 years. Take me to Millie's? I looked at her. In the yellow porch light. This woman who had been best friend for 11 years, and who had just told me she'd been wondering for 3 months why she'd never kissed me. And something in my chest, that particular ache, specific carefully managed pain that had lived behind my sternum for over a decade, loosened. Not disappeared. Loosened. Like something that had been pulled very tight for a very long time was, for the first time, being allowed to release. Yeah, I said. Let's go to Millie's. We slipped back through the side gate long enough to tell Rachel we were heading out. My sister looked at us, looked at our faces, specifically, with the particular precision of someone who had known both of us for years and was now doing rapid calculations, and she said nothing at all for a long, significant moment. Then she said, "It's about time," and hugged us both, and pushed us toward the gate, and we were gone. The drive to Millie's was 20 minutes on quiet streets, and we talked the entire time not about what had just happened, not directly, but in the looping, overlapping, finishing each other's sentences way we'd always talked, except that now there was a current running underneath it that had never been there before, or had always been there, and we had simply stopped pretending it wasn't. Millie's was a 24-hour diner we'd been going to since grad school. Vinyl booths the color of old mustard. Laminated menus that hadn't changed since the mid-90s. A pie case by the register that was always lit up like a small miracle. We'd eaten there after bad first dates and worse breakups, after her mother's first hospital stay, after the night I'd been passed over for a promotion I'd worked 2 years for. Millie's was the place we went when life required debriefing and real food at inconvenient hours. We sat in our usual booth, and then Claire did something she had never done in 11 years of sharing that booth. She did not sit across from me. She came around to my side. She slid in beside me, and she settled there like it was the most natural thing she'd ever done, her shoulder against mine, her hand on the table, close enough that our fingers were almost touching. I looked at her. "What?" she said, picking up her menu. "You're sitting on my side, I'm aware. You always sit across." I know, she studied the menu. I didn't want to sit across. I looked at her for another moment. Then I picked up my own menu. Our shoulders were touching. It was such a small thing. It was one of the largest things I'd ever experienced. "I'm getting the eggs," she said. "It's 10 o'clock at night. Eggs are appropriate at all hours. That's the beauty of eggs. I'm getting the burger. Get the fries too. I'll eat half. I know you'll eat half. I'm getting extra specifically because of that." She laughed, genuine soft, her shoulder pressing a little more warmly into mine. And I thought, this is the same as it always was. This is exactly the same. And it is entirely different. And somehow both of those things are true at the same time, and I don't know yet what to do with that. but I am more present in this diner booth than I have been anywhere in 11 years. The waitress came. We ordered. The coffee arrived, bad and familiar and perfect in the specific way that Millie's coffee was always perfect, not because it was good, but because of everything it had been present for. Claire wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me sideways. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," I said. "Why tonight?" she said. "Of all the nights in 11 years, why did tonight crack it open?" "I thought about it, Marcus," I said. She frowned. "What?" "3 weeks ago. At your apartment. I overheard him say that I was a little obsessive." I watched her face. "And I stood in your kitchen holding 2 glasses of ice water and I thought, he's not wrong. And then tonight he wasn't there. And you were standing next to me. And you stole my garlic knot and you looked at me like that." And I shook my head. I was so tired. I was so tired of being careful. She was quiet for a moment, her hands tight around the mug. "He said that," she said, and her voice had an edge I didn't often hear from her. "He's not entirely wrong," I said. "He's completely wrong," she said, firmly. Then quieter, "I broke up with him last week." I went very still. "You what?" "Last week, Tuesday." She looked down at her coffee. "It wasn't working. It hadn't been working for a while. He made me feel like everything I cared about was," she paused, finding the word, "excessive. Like I was always too much, too emotional, too loyal, too attached to the people I loved." She glanced at me. "He didn't like you, I'm aware. He was jealous of you," she said, which I thought was kind of ridiculous at the time. And now I understand was not ridiculous at all. It was just information he had that I wasn't ready to process. The eggs arrived. And the burger and the extra fries. Claire immediately took some without asking. I had gotten extra specifically for this. And it still made me absurdly happy. We ate in the comfortable, easy silence that can only exist between 2 people who have eaten thousands of meals together. And underneath the silence was everything that had happened in the last hour, sitting between us not like a complication, but like a new piece of furniture, large and slightly strange in a familiar room, but absolutely, unmistakably, belonging there. "I'm scared," Claire said after a while. "I know," I said. "Not of you," she clarified. "Of this, of what it changes, of what it might." She searched for the word, destabilize. "I know," I said again. "You're not scared?" she asked. I looked at her. "I'm absolutely terrified," I said. "I have been terrified of this for 11 years. But I'm more terrified of another 11 years without it. And honestly, Claire, I don't think I could go back to pretending after tonight. I don't think I have that particular performance left in me." She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she reached out, slowly, and laced her fingers through mine on the table. Her hand was warm and familiar in the way that 11 years of friendship make someone's hand familiar, and completely new in a way I hadn't known to expect. "Then we don't pretend," she said. "We don't go back." "We don't go back," I agreed. We sat there in Millie's at 10:30 at night, my sister's engagement party still going somewhere across town without us, and we held hands on the sticky laminate table, and drank bad coffee, and split the extra fries, and started, slowly, carefully, with all the tentative wonder of people who have just discovered that the thing they'd been most afraid to want had been waiting, patient, cautioned, and quiet, and real, all along. And I thought, 11 years. 11 years of careful. It had taken a stolen garlic knot and one 4-word joke to end it. But it wasn't the joke that ended it. It was the moment she said, "Say it again," and meant it. And I finally stopped pretending I didn't know exactly what she meant. They stayed at Millie's until almost midnight. Not because they had run out of things to say. They never ran out of things to say. That had never once been their problem. But because neither of them wanted to be the one who stood up first and made the night officially over. There was something sacred about that booth. About bad coffee and the extra fries, and Claire's shoulder warm against Noah's arm. And both of them knew, without saying it, that the moment they stood up, they would have to walk back out into a world that was going to require them to figure out what came next. So they stayed. They ordered pie. Claire ate most of it. Noah pretended to be annoyed, and was not even slightly annoyed. It was Claire who finally put her fork down, looked at her empty plate and said, "Okay, I have to sleep. I have 23 7th graders tomorrow who will absolutely not care that I just had the most significant night of my life." "You could call in sick," Noah said. "I have never called in sick." "I know. It's genuinely concerning." She laughed, and he left cash on the table because he always left cash at Millie's. It felt like the right thing to do for a place that had absorbed so many of their worst nights and asked nothing a turn. And They walked out into the cool September air together. He drove her home. She lived 12 minutes from Millie's and they talked the entire way, easy and overlapping. And when he pulled up in front of her building, she didn't get out immediately. She sat there for a moment with her hand on the door handle, looking at her lap. "This is the part," she said, "where I would normally say good night and go inside and text you something stupid in 20 minutes. "I know," he said. "Except now it feels different. It is different." She looked at him. In the dim light from the street, she looked both exactly like herself and like someone he was seeing clearly for the first time, which was a contradiction that somehow made complete sense. "Is this going to be okay?" she said, not asking for reassurance, asking for honesty. "I don't know," he said. And then, "Because that wasn't quite enough, but I want it to be. More than I've wanted most things." She nodded slowly. Then she leaned across the center console and kissed him once, brief and deliberate, and pulled back before he could react properly. "Good night, Noah." "Good night, Claire." She got out, walked to her door, turned once and looked at him from the steps, and he could see, even from that distance, that she was smiling. Then she went inside. He sat in front of her building for longer than was strictly necessary. Then he drove home. Then he sat in his kitchen and did not sleep for approximately 3 hours, and it was the best 3 hours of insomnia he'd ever had. She texted him at 12:47. The text said, "I'm not sorry about the garlic knot." He stared at it for 5 seconds. Then he typed back, "I'm not sorry either." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "Good night, Noah." For real this time, he typed, "Good night, Claire." For real. He put his phone face down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, something that was not the low-managed ache of wanting something he'd decided he couldn't have. What he felt instead was something brighter and considerably more terrifying. Something that required a future. He fell asleep somewhere around 3 in the morning with a slight smile on his face that he was absolutely unaware of. The next morning arrived the way mornings always did, aggressively and without apology, and Noah was on a job site by 7:30, managing the early stages of a community center renovation that was behind schedule for reasons that were entirely the fault of a subcontractor he was no longer using. He had a thermos of coffee and a sheaf of revised blueprints and a crew of 8 men who were professional, competent, and completely uninterested in the fact that their project manager had just had a life-altering conversation on a dim front porch the night before, which was, he thought, probably for the best. He was reviewing load-bearing specifications when his phone buzzed. "Claire, how's the site, Noah?" "Behind schedule. The electrical framing is wrong, and I'm trying not to fire anyone before 9 a.m. "Claire, very restrained of you." "Noah, I'm growing as a person." "Claire, speaking of growing as a person, are we still doing Thursday?" He looked at that text for a moment. Thursday was their standard weekly dinner. They'd been having it for 8 years, rotating between his place and hers, cooking or ordering in, depending on who'd had the worst week. It had always been just Thursday dinner. Now, apparently, it was going to be something that required explicit confirmation. He typed, "Yes, but I think we have to call it a date." 3 dots. A pause that lasted just long enough to make him aware of his own heartbeat. Then, "Okay, yes, a date." Then a second later, "That's a terrifying word." Then immediately after, "Don't tell me it's not terrifying. I know you, Noah Bennett. I know you're also terrified." He smiled at his phone in the middle of a construction site like an absolute idiot. One of his crew, a guy named Danny, who had worked with him for 4 years and missed nothing, appeared at his elbow with revised material estimates and looked at his face and said, very carefully, "You okay, boss?" "Fine," Noah said. "You look weird." "I'm fine, Danny." Danny looked at him for another beat, decided not to pursue it, and went back to work. Noah pocketed his phone and redirected his attention to the blueprints and spent the next 6 hours being extremely professional and focused and thinking about Claire approximately every 14 minutes. Thursday came. He cooked. He did not normally experience performance anxiety about cooking because he was a competent cook who had fed Claire dozens of times without incident. But he stood in his kitchen at 6 o'clock on Thursday evening, staring at a pot of pasta sauce and feeling something he could only describe as dramatically unnecessary nerves. He had known this woman for 11 years. He had seen her cry over a documentary about baby elephants. She had held a plastic bag for him once when he'd gotten food poisoning at a street fair in 2019. There was no logical reason to be nervous. He was nervous. She arrived at 6:30 wearing a blue sweater he'd seen before, but which seemed, tonight, to have been specifically calibrated to make him forget the word for pasta. She handed him a bottle of wine and said, "I changed my outfit 4 times. He blinked. "You did? 3 times is acceptable," she said, stepping past him into the kitchen. 4 is, I'm aware, 4 is a lot. "For the record," he said, "you look—" "Don't make it weird," she said. "I wasn't going to make it weird. I was going to say you look great. That's the beginning of weird. Claire. I'm sorry." She stopped in the middle of his kitchen and pressed both hands flat against the counter and looked at him with an expression that was equal parts amusement and genuine, unguarded anxiety. "I'm nervous. I don't know how to do this with you. I know how to do everything with you, and I do not know how to do this." He set down the wooden spoon. He crossed to where she was standing and leaned against the counter beside her, close enough that their arms were touching, far enough to give her room. "Okay," he said. "So let's not do it perfectly. Let's just do it." Deep philosophical guidance. "Thank you. I'm a builder. I'm better with concrete problems." She looked at him sideways. Then she laughed, real, genuine, the laugh that had always undone him, and some of the stiffness went out of her shoulders. "Okay," she said. "Let's just do it." They had dinner. It was good pasta and decent wine, and approximately 40 minutes of the slightly stilted, overly careful conversation. Two people, knew each other too well to pretend they were strangers, but were not yet sure how to be, whatever they currently were. And then, because this was them, and they could never stay stiff for long, the conversation broke open somewhere around the second glass of wine, and suddenly they were talking the way they always talked, fast and overlapping and honest and funny, except that now, underneath everything, there was this new thing, this warm and slightly frightening current, and Noah found himself laughing at something she said, and then catching himself in the middle of the laugh because she was looking at him, and it was different. The way she looked at him now. It had always been warm, always been direct, but now there was something in it that she was no longer bothering to conceal. "Ask me something," she said. "Something you don't know." He thought about it. "Okay. What's the thing you're most afraid of in all of this?" She was quiet for a moment. "That we know each other too well," she said. "That there's no mystery left. That we're going to try to be romantic, and it's going to feel like putting on a costume." She looked at him. "You already know I sleep in my high school track t-shirts. You know I can't go to sleep without checking the door lock twice. You know I cry at children's choir concerts every single time without fail. I don't need mystery," he said immediately. "Noah, I'm serious. I don't want a woman I don't know. I want you. I want the real you, the version I already know, and every version I haven't learned yet. The mystery I want isn't who you are. It's who we are. Together. That's the part neither of us knows." She stared at him. "When did you get articulate?" "I've had 11 years to think about this conversation." She laughed again, softer this time, and reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. And they sat like that for a moment, without needing to fill the silence. And that was the moment. That was the moment when Noah understood that this was going to be something real. Not a mistake made in a warm moment at his sister's party. Not nostalgia dressed up as romance. This was going to be the thing. And it was wonderful, and it was absolutely terrifying, and he would not have traded it for anything on earth. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it automatically. She always glanced at her phone when it buzzed, a reflex built by years of being on call for her mother, and he watched her face change. Not dramatically. Just a small shift. The warmth that had been there a moment ago did not disappear, but something else arrived beside it. Something careful. "What is?" he said. "It's an email," she said. She set the phone face down on the table. "I'll look at it later." "Claire, it's fine, it can wait." "You turned the phone over," he said. "You only do that when something surprises you." She looked at him for a moment, with the expression she wore when she was weighing honesty against protection. He knew that expression. He'd seen it for 11 years. He said quietly, "Hey, don't start doing that with me." She exhaled. She picked up the phone. She turned it over and looked at the screen and said, "It's from the Boston district. The leadership position I applied for. They're confirming a final interview." She put the phone down. "In 2 weeks." He heard everything she wasn't saying in the pause after that sentence. "When did you apply?" he asked. 4 months ago," she said. Carefully. Watching him, "You didn't tell me." "No." "Why?" She pressed her lips together. "Because it was very preliminary. And because I didn't want to." She stopped. "Didn't want to what, Claire?" She met his eyes. I didn't want to put it in front of you, she said, and then have to watch you be supportive about it. Because you would have been. You always are. And sometimes, Noah, sometimes your support feels like you've already made a decision about something. Before I've finished thinking. That landed with a precision that made him very still. He did not react immediately. He sat with it for a moment because it deserved that. That's fair, he said finally. I'm not saying it to hurt you. I know, it's still fair. She leaned forward. It's a real opportunity. It's a program director position. Full curriculum design authority. A budget. A real staff. It's the kind of job I've been working toward for a long time. She paused. And I should have told you about it months ago. But I didn't. And now it's here, on our first actual date, and I genuinely don't know what to do with that. He looked at her across the dinner table. At Claire, who had been his best friend since they were 22 years old. Who was now, as of roughly 48 hours ago, something considerably more than that. And he felt two things simultaneously: pride, sharp and real and genuine, and something colder sitting just underneath it. Something he recognized as the particular fear of a man who had just found something he'd wanted for a very long time and could already see the specific way he might lose it. Okay, he said. She blinked. Okay, he refilled her wine glass. Then his own. Tell me about the position. All of it. Not because I'm going to be supportively terrible about it. Because I actually want to know. She studied him for a moment, like she was checking for hairline cracks in something structural. Then she nodded and she told him the job, the program, the school district, the scope of it, which was genuinely impressive, the kind of thing she'd been building towards since grad school. The flap that didn't come around twice. She talked about it with an energy that was different from her everyday energy, brighter and slightly hungry in the way that ambition makes people when they finally let themselves name what they actually want. He listened. He asked real questions. He did not perform supportiveness. He was just there, the way he'd always been there, except that now he was also terrified and doing his level best, not to let that speak louder than she needed him to listen. When she finished, he said, Boston is 6 hours away. I know, she said, if you get it. If I get it, she agreed. You'll get it. She looked at him. Noah, I'm not being supportively terrible, I'm being accurate. I've watched you work for 11 years, and you are exceptionally good at what you do. And if you go into that interview the way you just talked to me about this job for the last 20 minutes, you will get it. The silence that followed was the kind that contained many things at once. So what do we do? She asked. I don't know yet, he said honestly. But I know we don't decide tonight. I know that we don't let the thing that just started get preemptively buried by a problem that hasn't actually arrived yet. He met her eyes. Can we agree to that? She considered him for a long moment. Then yes, okay, not tonight. Not tonight. They finished dinner. They did the dishes together the way they'd always done them. Him washing, her drying, the radio on low in the background, and it was domestic and familiar, and full of the particular electricity of two people who have just reclassified themselves and are still adjusting to the new gravity of ordinary things. Before she left, she stood in his doorway and said, I want to go on another date. Good, he said. Before the Boston thing. Definitely before the Boston thing. And maybe one after. Absolutely one after. She kissed him goodnight longer than the one in the car, less tentative. The kiss of someone who has decided to stop being cautious about at least one thing, and Noah closed the door and stood in his entry for a moment, and understood, with great clarity, that he was completely and thoroughly in love with his best friend, and that the next 6 weeks were going to test every single resource he had. He was right. The weeks that followed had a quality that Noah would later struggle to describe accurately. The closest he could get was this. They felt like running toward something, while simultaneously running away from it, except that both directions were exactly the same direction, and he had no choice but to keep moving. He and Claire went on 3 more dates in the following 2 weeks. A movie that they talked over so relentlessly that they had to apologize to the people in the row ahead of them. A Saturday morning at the farmer's market where Claire bought an unreasonable quantity of heirloom tomatoes, and Noah carried them all without complaint, which she said later was the most romantic thing he'd done yet. A Sunday at Linda's, Claire's mother, where they sat in the small living room while Linda did physical therapy exercises in the dining room, and the 3 of them had lunch together afterward, and Linda, who had known Noah for a decade, who had watched him fix her porch railing and drive her daughter to appointments and sit in waiting rooms without being asked, looked at the two of them across the table and said, simply and without ceremony, "Finally." "Mom," Claire said. "I'm 71 and I had a stroke," Linda said. "I'm not pretending to be surprised by things I'm not surprised by." Noah laughed. Claire covered her face with one hand. Noah laughed harder. Linda looked at him with sharp, warm eyes. "You'll take care of her?" she said. Not quite a question. "We'll take care of each other," Noah said. Linda nodded once, like he'd passed something. "Good answer," she said. Things were good. Things were genuinely, honestly, sometimes difficult to believe good. And then, 3 weeks after Rachel's engagement party, Noah did something that he believed was generous, and that was, in fact, the specific thing that nearly destroyed everything. It started with a phone call. He had a former colleague, a man named Greg Paulson, who'd worked with Noah briefly on a cross-state project and had since moved to Boston, where he ran a nonprofit education consulting firm. They were not close friends, but they were friendly. They had stayed in touch the way people who genuinely respect each other do. Occasional texts, the odd professional referral. Noah called Greg on a Tuesday afternoon, from his truck, parked outside a hardware store, while Claire was teaching a full day of 7th grade and had no idea. "I've got a friend," Noah said, "who's interviewing for the district program director position in your area in a couple weeks. She's exceptional, genuinely exceptional. The kind of professional who changes the culture of wherever she lands." He gave Claire's name and credentials, kept it clean and factual and professional. Greg said, "I know a couple people on that hiring committee. I can put in a word. I'd appreciate that," Noah said. He hung up, and he sat in his truck for a moment outside the hardware store. And he told himself that this was support, that this was what you did for someone you loved when they had worked for something for a long time, and deserved to have every possible advantage. He told himself it was the right thing. He did not tell Claire. He also, in those same 3 weeks, quietly pulled up apartment listings in the Boston metro area and spent 2 evenings doing math about moving costs and market rates. He saved 4 listings in a folder on his laptop that he labeled with grim humor research. He did not show it to anyone. He did not mention it to Claire. He told himself that he was simply being prepared, that he was thinking ahead. That being prepared was one of his best qualities. These were things he told himself. He also began, in small and nearly imperceptible ways, to pull back slightly from conversations about the future. Not from Claire, he was still completely present with her, still showing up, still real. But from the future. When she brought up a concert she wanted to see in the spring, he said, "That sounds great," instead of "let's get tickets." When his sister mentioned a family trip to the coast in February, he said maybe, instead of his usual immediate yes. He was pulling a familiar lever. He didn't fully see it yet. Then the day came when he told Claire about Greg. He had not planned to tell her that evening specifically. They were at the half-renovated community center she'd come by to bring him coffee and see the progress on the renovation, which she'd been following with genuine interest because the space was being converted into something the neighborhood genuinely needed. They were standing near the east wall, which his crew had just opened up to install new windows, and the light was coming through the open frame in long late afternoon lines, and Claire was saying something about the color they'd chosen for the interior walls, and he said, "Oh, actually, I should tell you something." She looked at him. He told her about Greg. Quickly, factually. The way you tell someone something you believe is unambiguously good news. The silence that followed was not the silence of someone who was pleased. Claire looked at him. The warmth that had been in her face 30 seconds ago had gone somewhere complicated. "You called someone on the hiring committee," she said. "He's not on the committee. He knows people on the committee." "Noah, I wanted to give you without telling me," she said. "You made a call on my behalf without telling me. I know what you were trying to do." She set her coffee down on the nearest stable surface, a sawdust-covered workbench, and crossed her arms and looked at him with an expression that he recognized, distantly, as the expression of a woman who had expected more and was recalibrating in real time. "Claire, he's a friend." It was one phone call. "People do this for each other all the time." "Not without asking," she said. "Not without even mentioning it. Not after we'd specifically talked about how this was going to be a decision we made together." Her voice was steady, but there was something running beneath the steadiness. "How long ago?" He hesitated. "How long ago?" 3 weeks, he said. She went very still. 3 weeks. Yes, the week after our first date. He said nothing. She uncrossed her arms. She picked up her coffee and she looked at it, and she said, in a voice that was quiet, in a way that was more alarming than volume, "Did you also research apartments?" He felt the specific sensation of the ground shifting. "Claire, did you?" "I looked at a few listings," he said. "I wasn't." "You were planning my move," she said. "You were planning my move to Boston." "Before the interview. Before I've made any decision." "You were..." She stopped. She pressed her free hand flat against the side of her leg in the gesture she made when she was working very hard to stay level. "You were already sending me away." That is exactly what that is," she said. "You were being generous and supportive and practical, and it was all in service of sending me away before I had the chance to decide anything. Before I could decide to stay, before I could decide to choose." She stopped again. The light was still coming through the open window frame. His crew had cleared out for the afternoon. They were completely alone in the half-finished room, and the silence felt enormous. "Before I could decide to choose you," she said, quietly. "Completely." He had no defense that wasn't also a confirmation. He stood there with his hands at his sides, and he understood, with the particular clarity of someone whose pattern has just been named precisely, that she was right. He had been doing it. He had been doing it with the full conviction of someone who believed he was being selfless, and it had been, underneath the generosity, the same old fear. Get ahead of the loss. Make yourself useful in the leaving. Love someone loudly enough that when they go, you can tell yourself you did everything right. "I wasn't trying to push you away," he said. "I know you weren't trying," she said. And that was somehow worse than if she'd thought it was deliberate. "But Noah, you don't get to call it love when you make my choices for me." He heard that. He heard every syllable of it. She looked at him for a long moment. "I haven't even decided about Boston," she said. "I haven't told you this yet, because I was waiting until I could talk it through with you as my partner, not with you making notes in a folder on your laptop." Mine. He winced. "There is another option," she said. "The Portland School District reached out 2 weeks ago. They want me to design a counseling program here for kids dealing with family illness and caregiver stress. It's smaller, less prestigious, less money." She paused. "It's the work I actually want to do. The work that comes from everything I've been through with my mother. And I didn't tell you about it because I wanted us to sit down together and think through both options, like two people who are building something." He said very quietly, "Claire." Instead, she said, "You reduced it to a logistics problem, and you solved it alone. And I found out because you told me casually, as good news." She picked up her coffee again. "I asked you to say, 'I love you' again because I wanted the truth," she said. "Not another reason for you to disappear behind something noble." She walked out. Not dramatically. Not with a slammed door. She walked out through the open frame of the east entrance, past the lumber stacks and the sawdust and the new windows waiting to be installed. And she was gone. And Noah stood in the middle of the half-finished room in the long afternoon light and felt the full weight of what he had done. He had done the generous thing. He had done the selfless thing. He had done it completely alone, without her knowledge or consent, driven by a fear so familiar he had dressed it up as love and barely noticed the difference. He had spent 11 years learning to love Claire from a careful distance. He had not yet learned how to love her from in the same room. He stood there for a long time. The light changed. The room got quieter. Outside, the neighborhood sounds continued: traffic, a dog, someone's radio from across the street, and inside, Noah Bennett stood in the half-finished building he was paid to repair and understood, with devastating clarity, that fixing other people's structures had always been considerably easier than examining his own. He called her that night. She didn't pick up. He called again at 9, at 9:45. He did not leave a voicemail because every sentence he rehearsed in his head sounded either defensive or pathetic, and Claire deserved neither. He texted at 10:15, "I'm not going to explain it away. I just want you to know I heard you." She did not respond. He sat in his kitchen until nearly midnight and did not touch the folder on his laptop. The next morning was Wednesday. He was on the job site by 7, same as always, because the building did not care about his personal life, and the crew needed direction, and motion was better than stillness when your head was doing what his head was currently doing. Danny showed up at 7:15 and took one look at him and said absolutely nothing, which was one of the things Noah genuinely appreciated about Danny. By 9 o'clock, Noah had made 3 decisions, demolished one wall that was scheduled for tomorrow, and accepted that he was not going to be able to fix this the way he fixed everything else, with planning and execution and a clear outcome. This was not a structural problem. This was not something he could measure and correct and call done. He ate lunch alone in his truck. He was halfway through a sandwich he didn't taste when his phone buzzed. "Not Claire, Rachel." He almost didn't answer. He answered. "Talk," his sister said without preamble. "How do you know something happened?" "Because Claire called Mom this morning and Mom called me, and Mom is not a gossip, so for her to call me means it was significant." A pause. "Also, I know you, Noah." "What did you do?" he told her. All of it, the phone call to Greg, the apartment listings, the folder, Claire's face in the community center, what she'd said when she left. He told it flatly, and without editorial, because Rachel was one of 3 people in his life who would not let him editorialize his own bad behavior into something more comfortable. Rachel was quiet for a moment after he finished. "You built her an exit," she said. "I know. You fell in love with her, and within 3 weeks, you were already building her an exit." "I know, Rachel. That's a you problem, Noah. That is specifically and precisely a you problem that has nothing to do with Claire and everything to do with Dad." He said nothing. "You have been waiting," Rachel said, and her voice was careful now, careful in the way she got when she was saying something important and wanted it to land correctly. "Your entire adult life for the people you love to leave. And when they don't leave fast enough, you help them pack." The sandwich sat untouched on his knee. "That's not," he started. "Is it not?" she said. He closed his mouth. He looked out the windshield at the community center, at the east wall, where the new window frames were going in, at the building he was in the process of making into something better than it currently was. "No," he said very quietly. "Okay," Rachel said, not unkindly. "So what are you going to do about it?" He thought about it for a genuine moment. Not the reflexive kind of thinking that produces the sounding answer. The slower kind. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I know I can't show up with an apology that sounds like another plan. She doesn't need me to solve it. She needs me to understand what I did." "Yes," Rachel said, "that is correct." "Okay, Noah." "Yeah." She didn't leave, Rachel said. She walked out of the room. "Those are different things. Don't treat them the same." He sat with that for the rest of his lunch break and most of the afternoon. Claire, meanwhile, was having a day that required all 23 of her 7th graders, and approximately 0 emotional bandwidth left over. She taught 3 periods back to back, mediated a conflict between 2 girls that had been building since September, stayed 40 minutes late to talk to a student whose home situation had been quietly deteriorating, and drove to Linda's after school because Wednesday was her mother's physical therapy day, and she always drove her home after. Linda was in good form. She moved through the exercises with the determined precision of a woman who'd had decided that a stroke was not going to be the defining event of her final decades. And she talked the entire drive home about a documentary she'd watched, and a neighbor who'd gotten a new dog, and whether Claire thought it was too late in the season to plant winter kale. Claire answered everything, appropriately, on time. Her mother did not notice anything wrong for approximately 11 minutes. Then she said, without looking away from the passenger window, "What happened with Noah?" Claire gripped the steering wheel. "Nothing. Claire Ann Morgan. We had a disagreement." "About what?" She exhaled. "About the way he loves people." Linda turned to look at her daughter. "Explain that." And Claire did. Not all of it. Not with the precision she would have used if she were talking to Rachel or to Dana, but enough. The Greg phone call. The apartment listings. The way Noah had been quietly preparing her departure, as though it were inevitable, not out of malice, she said, not because he wanted her to go, but because he couldn't seem to stop himself from anticipating loss and getting ahead of it. Linda listened without interrupting. When Claire finished, she said, "His father." Claire glanced at her. "I know." That man left without a word. Noah was 16. Linda folded her hands in her lap. "You don't walk away from that without carrying it somewhere." "I know, Mom. I do know that." Claire's voice was patient but strained at the edges. But understanding why someone does something and accepting what they did are 2 different things. He made decisions about my life. About my future, he made them alone, after we'd specifically talked about not doing that. "Yes," Linda said simply. "He has to understand that loving me doesn't mean managing me." "Yes," Linda said again. "I'm not asking him to be perfect. I'm asking him to ask me. Linda was quiet for a moment. "Do you know what I've noticed about Noah?" she said. "In 10 years of watching him." "What?" "He has never once asked for anything for himself," Linda said. "Not once. He shows up, he fixes, he gives. And he never once says, 'I need this. I want this. Stay,'" she paused, "because if he never asks, he can never be told no." Claire drove in silence for a block. 2 blocks. "That's not my problem to solve," she said finally. But she said it with less certainty than she'd had an hour earlier. "No," her mother agreed. "It's not. But it might be worth understanding before you decide what to do with it." They arrived at Linda's house. Linda got out slowly, steadied herself, turned back to look at her daughter through the open car door. "I'm not telling you to forgive him immediately," she said. "I'm telling you not to make a permanent decision, based on a pattern he doesn't yet fully see in himself." She closed the car door. Claire sat in the driveway for a moment. Then she drove home. She did not call Noah that night, but she also did not sleep well, and somewhere around 2 in the morning, she found herself sitting in her living room in the dark, thinking about something Noah had told her once, during a particularly bad week after her mother's first hospitalization. When she'd asked him how he kept showing up without seeming exhausted by it, he'd said very simply, "Because you would do the same for me." And she had thought then that it was just something people said. Now, in the dark at 2 in the morning, she turned it over and found that she believed it, that he had meant it completely, that for Noah, showing up for other people was the only language of love he'd ever learned to speak fluently, and that what he hadn't learned, had possibly never been taught, was how to stay in the room and say, "I need something too. I am afraid too. Please don't go." She fell asleep on her couch. She woke up at 6 with a stiff neck and a clearer head and still no idea what to say to him. She went to work anyway. She was a school counselor. She counseled other people through uncertainty every single day. She was extremely good at telling other people that discomfort was not the same as disaster. She was somewhat less good at applying this to herself. Thursday passed. Friday passed. Saturday morning arrived, and Claire drove to the farmer's market alone, for the first time in 3 weeks, and bought heirloom tomatoes and felt, irrationally and completely, his absence at the stall, where they always argued about whether yellow tomatoes were worth the premium price. He always said they were. She always said they weren't. They always bought them anyway. She bought yellow tomatoes. She stood on the sidewalk outside the market, holding a paper bag of yellow tomatoes, and felt something shift in her chest that was not quite resolution, but was adjacent to it. She called Dana. Dana Cho had been Claire's friend since graduate school, sharp, direct, and constitutionally incapable of telling people what they wanted to hear, which made her either exhausting or invaluable, depending on what you needed at the time. Claire met her for coffee at 11, explained the situation in its entirety, and waited. Dana listened. "Okay, couple of things. Tell me." First thing, he was wrong. What he did was controlling. The intent was generous, but the action was controlling, and you were right to call it out. "Thank you." Second thing, Dana said. "You applied for a job in Boston 4 months ago and didn't tell your best friend of 11 years. The man you'd been in love with." Don't make that face, Claire. "Everyone knew for at least 4 years. You didn't tell him." Claire opened her mouth, closed it. "You were also making unilateral decisions," Dana said. Not unkindly, but with the precision of someone who had thought it through. You were protecting yourself from his reaction before you'd even given him the chance to have it. You were afraid that if you told him about Boston, he'd be supportive in that quietly devastating way he has, and you'd feel guilty for wanting it, and you didn't want to feel guilty. So you didn't tell him. Claire stared at her coffee cup. "So you're both," Dana said, "doing the same thing. Different method, same mechanism. Protecting yourselves from a conversation that feels too risky to have." "That's annoyingly accurate," Claire said. "I know." Dana picked up her own cup. "The question is not who was right and who was wrong. The question is whether you two are capable of actually being honest with each other now. Not the easy stuff. The stuff that's genuinely hard to say." Claire thought about that for a long time on the drive home. She was still thinking about it when, at 2:30 on Saturday afternoon, she got a text from Noah. It said, "I don't want to show up without asking first. Can I ask?" She looked at the text. She looked at it for a long time. Then she typed ask. His response came immediately, like he'd been holding it ready. "Can I come see you?" Not to explain. Not to fix it. But just want to be in the same room with you and start from honest." She set the phone down, picked it up, set it down again. She typed, "Not my apartment. The bookstore, 3 dots appeared. Then the college one, she typed tonight. 7. She put the phone in her pocket and stood in her kitchen and understood that whatever happened tonight was going to determine something large. She didn't know exactly what, but it was going to be one of those conversations that years later you can identify as the one that set the direction. She'd had maybe 3 of those in her life. She was fairly sure this was going to be the 4th. She arrived at the bookstore at 6:55. It was still there, smaller than memory, the way places from your past always are, but real and warm and smelling exactly the same, old paper and wood, and the particular dusty warmth of a room that has housed thousands of other people's stories. She stood just inside the door for a moment, and the 11 years compressed without warning, and she was 22 years old again, and angry about Steinbeck, and knocking books off a shelf, and not yet knowing that the man laughing at her from behind the register was going to matter more than anyone she'd ever meet. Noah was already there. He was standing near the literature section, of course he was, and he was holding a small notebook, the cheap kind with the cardboard cover, and he looked exactly the way she'd known he'd look, slightly uncertain, not hiding it, which was already different from how he usually looked when things were difficult. Usually when things were difficult, Noah Bennett looked calm. He'd perfected calm. He wore it like body armor. Tonight he looked like a man who had decided not to wear armor. She walked toward him. He watched her come without moving. When she stopped in front of him, close enough to speak quietly, he said, "Hi." "Hi," she said. "You came, I said I would, a beat." Then he held up the notebook slightly. "I brought this," he said. "No plans in it, no logistics, no apartment listings." He paused. "Just questions I wanted to ask you. That I should have been asking from the beginning." She looked at the notebook. She looked at him. "Okay," she said. They found a quiet corner near the back of the store, 2 chairs angled toward each other in the way that suggested conversation. They sat. Noah opened the notebook to the first page. Then he looked up at her. "I owe you an apology first," he said. "Before anything else." "Okay," she said. "I called Greg Paulson without telling you," he said. "That was wrong. Not because the intent was wrong. I genuinely wanted to help, but because it was your opportunity and your decision, and I took a piece of it without asking. And the apartment research," he stopped. "I convinced myself that was preparation. It wasn't. It was me already grieving something that hadn't happened yet, and building the infrastructure of your leaving, so that when it came, I'd have been useful in it." He set the notebook on his knee. "Rachel said I help people pack," he said. "Even when they haven't said they're leaving. I think she's right." Claire was quiet. She let him finish. "My dad left when I was 16, he said, and his voice shifted slightly on the word left, a barely perceptible change in texture. He didn't say he was going. He didn't argue or warn or give us anything to prepare for. He just stopped being there one morning, and I have spent a very long time becoming someone who cannot be left by surprise. Someone who sees the leaving before it happens and gets ahead of it." He looked at her directly. "It's not fair what I did. And the fact that it's from a real place doesn't make it fair." She held his gaze. "It doesn't. I know. But thank you," she said, "for saying it without trying to make me feel sorry for you." Something in his face relaxed, just slightly. "Dana called you," he said. "Dana told me things I already knew," she said. "She also told me things about myself that I didn't love hearing." She folded her hands in her lap. "I should have told you about Boston. 4 months ago when I applied. You were my best friend. You were the person I processed everything with. And I didn't tell you, because I was afraid of what your support would look like, and how it would make me feel about wanting it." "What do you mean?" he said. "I mean," she said carefully, "that I knew you would be supportive. Fully, genuinely supportive. And I knew that if you were supportive, I would feel guilty about wanting a thing that would take me away from you. Even before we were." She gestured between them, this. "I felt guilty preemptively." She looked down for a moment. "Which means I was protecting myself from a conversation I hadn't given you the chance to have, which is its own version of deciding something alone." He was very still. "You knew," he said, "before the party, that you had feelings for me." It wasn't quite a question. She answered it anyway. "Not consciously," she said. "But looking back, yes. I think I applied for Boston. Partly because I was scared of what was happening to what I felt about you. And putting 3,000 miles between us seemed like a solution that didn't require me to have a conversation." The honesty of it sat in the air between them. Noah said slowly, "We have both been making decisions designed to protect us from each other." "Yes," she said. while being each other's closest person. Yes. That's a remarkable achievement, he said, with a flatness that was not quite humor and not quite despair. It really is, she agreed. He opened the notebook. He looked at the first question he'd written there. Then he looked up at her. Can I just ask them, he said. All of them. Not as a plan. Just I want to actually know what you want. Not what I've decided you want. What you actually want. She nodded. The Portland job, he said, not Boston. What is it exactly? She told him. In detail. The counseling program for kids dealing with family illness. The school district proposal. The scope of it. The way it connected directly to what she and her students had lived through. Kids who were functioning as caregivers at 12 and 13. Who were holding their families together quietly. The way she'd held her own family together after her father died and then again when her mother got sick. The way nobody had ever designed a program specifically for those kids. Not in their district. Not anywhere she could find. She talked about it with the same energy she'd had at dinner 3 weeks ago, that brighter, hungrier energy. And when she felt slightly exposed by how much the wanting showed. Noah closed the notebook. That's the one, he said. She blinked. What? The Portland job. That's the one you want, he said it simply. Factually. I can hear it when you talk about it. I could hear it when you talked about Boston too, but it's different. Boston is something you want to have done. Portland is something you want to do. She stared at him. That's am I wrong? She opened her mouth. Closed it. No, she said. You're not wrong. Okay, he said. But I hadn't decided yet, she said. And I need it. I know, he said. You needed to say it out loud to someone who would listen without deciding for you. He held her gaze. I'm listening. Not deciding. What do you want to do? It was such a small reorientation. The same Noah, the same care. But the question was hers to answer, not his to preempt. I want the Portland job, she said. And hearing herself say it with clarity and space around it felt entirely different from any time she'd turned it over privately. It felt real. Chosen. I want to build the program. I want to stay close to my mother. And I want. She stopped. Say it, he said gently. I want to see what this is, she said, gesturing between them again. What we are. I don't want to make that decision from 3,000 miles away. He nodded. He didn't say I knew it or I told you or any version of I was right. He simply nodded, and she appreciated the restraint of it more than she could easily explain. Okay, he said. Now can I ask the hard one? She braced slightly. Yes. What do you need from me, he said, to actually trust me with this? Not to trust that I love you. I think you know that. But to trust that I won't build you another exit when I get scared? The question was so direct that it took her a moment to respond. Nobody had ever asked her something quite like that. Not with that specific acknowledgement baked into the asking. I need you to tell me when you're scared, she said. Not after. Not in retrospect, when you're explaining why you did something without telling me. When you feel the fear, I need you to say it then. He absorbed that. That is the thing I am worst at, he said. I know, she said. That's why I'm asking for it. Something shifted in his expression. The kind of shift that happens when a person accepts a thing fully, instead of just agreeing to it. I was scared, he said. Right then, present tense. When you told me about the Boston interview over dinner, I was scared. Not of you going, of being the reason you didn't go, of you resenting me for it eventually, of loving you and having it become the thing that cost you something real. He looked at her steadily. That's what I was feeling. I should have said it then. Instead, I called Greg and made a spreadsheet. She felt something soften in her chest that had been tight for 5 days. Thank you, she said. For what? For saying it now. He looked at her for a long moment. The bookstore was quiet around them, the mild sounds of other customers moving through other aisles, the low music from the small speaker behind the register. 11 years ago they had stood 2 aisles over and argued about prose style and knocked books off a shelf. Everything had started there, and here they were, back at the beginning, attempting to build something that was not a beginning at all, but a continuation of everything they had already been into. Something they hadn't allowed themselves to be yet. I'm not going to be perfect at it, he said. The scared thing. Saying it when it's happening. I know, she said. I'm going to try. I know that too. He reached across the small space between the chairs and held out his hand, palm up, not reaching for her, offering. She looked at his hand, and she thought about the night at the community center and the silence of the 5 days after it and her mother's voice saying, he never once asks for anything for himself, and Dana's voice saying, you're both doing the same. thing, and she thought about a man who had shown up for her for 11 years in every form of love except the most vulnerable one. She put her hand in his. "I'm not going to not call you out when you do it again," she said. "I would not want you to," he said. "It will probably be a conversation we have more than once. Most important conversations are," he said. She looked at their hands. His thumb moved slightly over her knuckles. "I don't need you to save me, Noah," she said. Quietly, precisely, "I need you to let me choose you." He tightened his hand around hers. "Not hard, just present. Then I'm here," he said. "And this time I'm not hiding behind anything." They sat there for a while longer. The bookstore closed around them, without either of them fully noticing. At some point the lights shifted, and a young employee came by, and very politely mentioned that they were locking up in 15 minutes. And they both looked up and looked around and laughed at themselves for having been so entirely elsewhere. They left together, out into the cool night, and they walked for a while, without a specific destination, their shoulders close, their hands occasionally touching. Two people who had just finished a conversation that had required, between them, 11 years of build-up and 5 days of silence, and one very honest hour in a bookstore, to finally say everything that needed saying. "The Portland job," Noah said, as they walked. "When do you have to give them an answer?" 2 weeks, she said. Okay. What else would I say?" he said. "It's your answer to give. I just want to know when, so I can be around when you do it. If you want that." She looked at him sideways. "You're doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" "The thing where you get it right, and you're slightly smug about it." "I'm not smug," he said. He was slightly. "You are a little smug," she said. "I am practicing vulnerability," he said. "It takes different shapes." She laughed. The real laugh, the one that had always been his undoing, the one that she'd stopped bothering to moderate around him years ago. She laughed, and it echoed slightly off the buildings, and he thought, there it is. There is the thing that has always been the reason. Not the dramatic version, not the 11 years of pining version, but this. This specific laugh on a specific street at 9:30 at night, walking toward nowhere in particular, having just survived the first real test of something fragile and new. They had survived it. Not cleanly, not without damage, but they had sat down in the same room and told each other the truth without using the truth as a weapon. And that he understood now, with the clarity that only comes after you have nearly done something irreversible, was the actual skill, not the showing up, not the fixing, not the years of faithful, devoted, carefully managed presence. The truth, offered without armor, in a room you haven't already half-built the exit for. That was the thing. He had almost missed it. He looked at Claire beside him in the dark, walking with her hands in her jacket pockets, and he thought, not almost. He had not missed it. She was here. He was here. The truth was out in the air between them, and it had not destroyed anything. It had, improbably, and without ceremony, built something instead. 2 weeks. That was what they had said in the bookstore. 2 weeks before Claire had to give Portland her answer. 2 weeks that Noah had promised himself he would spend being present instead of preemptive, asking instead of deciding, staying in the room instead of quietly building the door. He lasted 4 days before he almost ruined it again. Not with a phone call this time. Not with a spreadsheet. With silence, which was, he was beginning to understand, his oldest and most sophisticated weapon against himself. It started on a Tuesday evening. They were at his kitchen table, Claire grading reading assessments, Noah going over revised project timelines for the community center, the kind of evening that felt so naturally domestic that it sometimes stopped him mid-thought. This simple fact of her being in his space and belonging there completely. She had kicked her shoes off under the table. She had stolen his mechanical pencil 40 minutes ago and not returned it. She was chewing on the eraser end in the particular way she had when she was concentrating, which she had been doing since they were 22 years old, and which he had never been able to watch without feeling something he'd spent a decade carefully not naming. He was watching her do it now, pencil eraser between her teeth, eyes on a student's paper, and he was thinking about the Portland program, which she hadn't mentioned since the bookstore, and he felt the familiar cold current begin to move through him. The one that said, she's going quiet about it, because she's reconsidering. The one that said, what if Boston is still on the table? The one that said, most insidiously of all, you should ask her. You should bring it up. You should know where this is going. He did not ask. He went back to his blueprints. He told himself that was respect for her process. He knew, underneath the telling, that it was fear wearing respect's clothing. Claire looked up from the reading assessment. She looked at him for a moment. He didn't notice, because he was looking very intently at a load-bearing calculation that did not actually require that level of attention. "Noah," she said. You've been staring at the same page for 11 minutes. He looked up. She was watching him with the expression she wore when she had already identified the problem, and was giving him the opportunity to identify it himself first. He put the blueprints down. "I'm doing it again," he said. She tilted her head. "What are you doing?" Going quiet about something instead of saying it, he exhaled. "I was thinking about Portland. I was thinking about the fact that you haven't brought it up since Saturday. And instead of asking you about it, I was sitting here being very focused on a page I wasn't reading and telling myself that was giving you space." She set down the reading assessment. She looked at him steadily. "Was it giving me space?" "No," he said. "It was me managing my anxiety about your silence by performing calm. A beat, too." Then Claire said, "Okay. That's the most self-aware thing you've said in 11 years. I'm growing," he said. "You really are." She folded her hands on top of the student papers. "I haven't brought it up because I've been thinking about it. Not reconsidering Boston. Thinking about Portland. About what it actually means to take it. About whether I'm choosing it because it's right or because it's safe." He stayed quiet. He let her have the sentence. "The honest answer," she said, "is both. It's right and it's safe. And I've spent some of my life being suspicious of things that are both, that I keep checking for the part where it falls apart." "Does it have to fall apart?" he said. "No," she said. "I don't think it does." She looked at him across the table. "I think I'm going to call them tomorrow morning and accept." He felt something in his chest release, with an almost physical sensation, like a cable that had been under tension, finally being allowed to go slack. Not because Portland meant she was staying, because she had said it out loud to him, while they were both sitting at the same table, and she had said it like someone making a choice, rather than someone accepting a consolation. "Okay," he said. "That's it," she said. "For the second time in a week. Same question. Different weight." "What do you want me to say?" he said. "Tell me what you actually want me to say, and I'll say it." She thought about it. "Tell me it's the right choice." "I can't," he said. "Not because I don't think it is, I do. But you don't need me to tell you that. You already know." He held her gaze. "I can tell you that whatever you decide, I'm here. Not waiting to see how it affects me. Actually here." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up his mechanical pencil, and went back to the reading assessment. But before she put her eyes back on the page, she said very quietly, "Yeah. Okay. Good." He picked up the blueprints. Outside, the rain that had been threatening all day finally arrived, steady and slow against the windows. They sat at the table together, and the rain came down, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence, which was its own kind of answer to a question neither of them had asked out loud. She called Portland the next morning at 8:45. He knew because she texted him immediately after. "Done." Said yes. And then a few seconds later it felt right. And then a few seconds after that, "Stop smiling. I can feel you smiling from across the city." He was, in fact, smiling in the middle of a materials delivery. He texted back, "I have no idea what you're talking about." She sent back a single eye roll emoji. He put his phone in his pocket and told Danny the delivery count was off by 12 units, and Danny said, "You seem weirdly happy about that." And Noah said, "It's a beautiful day, Danny." And Danny looked at the rain and said nothing. 2 days after Claire accepted Portland, the twist came. The one nobody had been expecting, not Claire, not Noah, not even Rachel, who prided herself on seeing things before they happened. It came in the form of a phone call to Claire's cell at 6:15 on a Thursday evening. She was at Noah's again, because she had been at Noah's most evenings since the bookstore, and neither of them had formally acknowledged that this was now simply where she spent her time after work, the way water finds the level it belongs to without being directed. She was on the couch with a book. He was in the kitchen doing something with pasta. The call came in, and she glanced at the screen, and her face did the thing, the small, careful shift, and he noticed it immediately from the kitchen doorway. "Who is it?" he said. She said. He went still, she answered. He did not move from the doorway. He watched her face, with the full attention of someone who had promised himself he was done, pretending he didn't care about the outcome of things. She said, "Yes, this is Claire Morgan." She said, "I see." She said, "When?" She said, "I understand." "Can I ask?" "Yes." "Yes, I see." There was a pause that lasted long enough for Noah's heart to do something complicated. Then she said, "Thank you for letting me know. I'll be in touch if I change my mind." She hung up. She sat very still on the couch with the phone in her lap. "Claire," he said. She looked up. "The Boston position changed," she said. "The program director they originally hired backed out 2 weeks ago. They've restructured the role. They're offering it at a senior level now. Bigger budget. Full staff of 8. And they want an answer in 72 hours." The rain outside had stopped. The city was doing the thing it did after rain. Slightly brighter. The air cleaner. Every surface reflecting light at a new angle. Noah came out of the doorway and sat in the chair across from the couch, close enough to be present without being on top of her. "Okay," he said. She looked at him. "You heard what I just said." "I heard. Senior level Noah, full staff." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "It's a significantly different offer than what I turned down." "I know," he said. "I already said yes to Portland." "I know." But she looked at her phone, then at him, then at her phone again. "I don't know what this is." He leaned forward, put his elbows on his knees, looked at her directly. "Tell me what you're feeling right now," he said. "Not what you should feel. What you actually feel." She was quiet for a moment. Then pulled, she said. "I feel pulled. In 2 completely real directions, by 2 completely real things. And I don't want to make the wrong choice, and She stopped. "I already called Portland. I already said yes. Portland will understand," he said. "Or they won't. But that's a separate question." She looked at him carefully. "You're not going to tell me what to do." "No," he said. "You're not going to quietly start researching moving companies tonight." "A beat." "No," he said. And the beat before it was real, he had felt the reflex, felt the familiar pull toward action and logistics and solving, and he had named it to himself and set it down. "I'm going to sit here and let you think out loud, and then I'm going to ask you questions, and at the end of it you're going to know what you want. And that is going to be the answer." She stared at him. Something moved across her face that was not quite gratitude and not quite relief, and was something larger than both. "Okay," she said. "Talk me through it." They talked for 2 hours. Not about Noah. Not about the relationship. Not about distance. Not about what it would mean for them. Those things lived in the room, and both of them knew it. But Claire had been right when she'd said, 3 weeks ago, that he couldn't call it love when he made her choices for her. So the conversation was about her work, what she'd built, what she wanted to build. The Portland program, the specific kids she'd already started thinking about, the framework she'd been sketching in the margins of notebooks, the way it connected to her own history, in a way that made it feel less like a career move and more like a calling. The Boston offer, the scope of it, the staff, the budget, the kind of institutional scale that could change practice across an entire district, the kind of thing you could put on a resume and have it open doors for the rest of your professional life. Noah asked questions, real ones, not leading, not designed to produce a particular answer. What do you want to have built in 10 years? What kind of work do you want to do every day? Where do you want the roots of it to be? When you imagine the Boston role in 5 years, how do you feel? When you imagine the Portland program in 5 years, how do you feel? She answered all of them. Slowly, carefully, with the particular focus she brought to things that mattered. And somewhere around the 90-minute mark, something settled in her face. Not a decision, exactly. More like the moment when a picture comes into focus after you've been adjusting the lens. She said, "It's still Portland." He waited. "Even with the senior offer," she said, "even with the budget and the staff. When I imagine standing in front of that program 5 years from now, I imagine Portland. I imagine those kids. The ones I already know. The ones sitting in my office right now who nobody has designed anything for." She shook her head slowly. "Boston is a bigger stage. Portland is the actual play." He nodded. "Tell me I'm not being small," she said. "Tell me I'm not choosing small because I'm afraid of big." "You are the least small person I've ever known," he said. And he meant it without any softness in it. It was a statement of fact. The same way load-bearing capacity was a fact, something he'd measured precisely over 11 years and was certain of. Small people don't build things from their own history. They build things from other people's templates. What you're describing is not small. It is specific. There's a difference. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she leaned back against the couch cushions and exhaled a long, slow exhale that had the quality of something finally set down after being carried too long. "I'm going to call them tomorrow," she said. Decline properly. And then I'm going to call Portland and confirm. Okay, he said. She looked at him. Say something else, she said. Like what? Like she gestured vaguely. Like the real thing. Not the supportive thing. The real thing. He understood what she was asking. He took a breath. I'm glad, he said, not because you're staying. Because you chose something you actually want, instead of something that looked like what you should want. And because you let me sit here while you decided, instead of making it alone. He paused. And yes, I am also glad you're staying. I'm allowed to be glad about that too. She smiled at him. Not the bright public smile. The real one, the one that was only ever fully visible, when she'd stopped managing herself around him, which had been happening, he realized, with increasing frequency. With something close to permanence. You are allowed to be glad about that, she said. Thank you, he said gravely. Don't push it, she said. He smiled. They had pasta reheated by then, which he apologized for, and she said was fine, which it was, because the pasta had never been the point of the evening. They ate and talked about smaller things, Rachel's wedding venue deposit, the community center timeline, a student of Claire's who'd written a story that had made her cry on her lunch break, the good kind of crying, the kind that means something landed exactly right. They talked the way they had always talked, fast and overlapping, and occasionally talking over each other and not minding. And the new thing was still present, underneath it, warm and slightly wild, the way new things are before they settle into themselves. But it did not feel fragile anymore. It felt like it was learning to hold weight. At 10 o'clock she said she should go home. He walked her to the door. She stood in the doorway, the same doorway he'd watched her leave through a dozen times before it meant what it now meant, and she looked at him with an expression that was direct and clear and unguarded in the way she had recently started, allowing herself to be unguarded around him, which still knocked something loose in him every time. I need to tell you something, she said. His stomach contracted slightly. Okay, about Marcus, she said. He waited. He called me, she said. Yesterday. I didn't mention it, because I was still deciding how I felt about it. She looked at him evenly. He apologized. For the obsessive comment. For the other things he said about you. She paused. He also said that he realized, in retrospect, that the reason he was jealous of you was because you loved me better than he did. Those were his exact words. Noah did not know what to do with that. He stood with it for a moment. Then, did it change anything for you? Hearing from him? No, she said immediately. He's right about what he said, and I told him thank you, and it changed nothing. She met his eyes. I wanted you to know, because I promised we wouldn't keep things. Even the ones that feel small. The things she'd just done, the precision of that, the deliberate transparencies of bringing something to him that she could easily have left, unmentioned, landed with more weight than she probably intended. Because it was proof of something. Of the thing she was building with him, the actual architecture of it. Not the grand gestures, but the daily small choices to not protect herself at the expense of honesty. This was what it looked like. This specific moment in a doorway at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night. Thank you, he said, for telling me. You're welcome. She pulled her jacket on. Then she stopped, jacket half on, and looked at him with an expression that shifted suddenly into something more important. Can I ask you something? Yes, he said. What does this look like, she said. Not today, not next week. What does it actually look like, long term, for you? She held his gaze. Because I realized I've been asking myself what I want from the work, and I haven't asked myself clearly enough what I want from this. And I want to ask you, instead of just assuming you've thought about it, because that's what we said we'd do. He looked at her in his doorway, half in, half out, jacket halfway on, asking him with complete directness what he wanted the future to look like. The question he had never allowed anyone to ask him. The question he had always answered in advance, silently, by building exits before anyone could make him name what he was afraid to lose. I want this, he said. What we're doing right now. I want more evenings at the kitchen table. I want to know about your students and have you ask about the projects. I want to still go to Millie's when things are hard, and I want the bill to stop mattering between us because we're not tracking it anymore. He paused. I want to meet your mother for dinner without it being a favor I'm doing. I want Rachel's wedding to be the first thing we go to as us, officially, without anyone being surprised by it. He stopped, and eventually not now. Not as pressure. But eventually I want to not be going to different addresses at the end of the night. She had gone very still. Her jacket was still halfway on. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before, or had seen and always reinterpreted as something safer, something that fit more easily inside the category of friendship. "Okay," she said. "Very. Too much," he said. "No," she said. "Not too much. Right amount." She finished putting the jacket on. "I want those things too. For the good," he said. She kissed him. Good night. It was different from the first one on the porch, different from the careful one in his car, different even from the one in the bookstore. It had a quality of landing, the way things do when they have found the exact surface they were always meant to contact. She pulled back. She looked at him. She said, "Good night, Noah." "Good night, Claire." She went down the steps, and he watched her go, and he stayed in the doorway this time, instead of closing it too quickly, because he was practicing staying in sight of the things he cared about, instead of pretending indifference was the same as safety. The weeks that followed settled into something that felt, to Noah, like the specific pleasure of a structure that has been correctly built, not glamorous, not loud, but solid in a way that holds weight without protest. They went to Rachel's engagement dinner as a couple, officially, and Rachel's future mother-in-law saw them arrive together, and said to Rachel, with great satisfaction, "I knew they were married," and Rachel did not correct her. They drove Linda to a follow-up appointment, and sat in the waiting room together, and Claire fell asleep on his shoulder at one point, briefly, and he sat very still so as not to wake her, and Linda came out and saw them, and pretended not to and the particular to who noticed everything, and chose carefully what to acknowledge. There was an evening when everything almost came apart again. 3 weeks after the Boston call, 4 weeks before Claire was scheduled to start the Portland program orientation. It started with a conversation they should have had earlier. Noah had been renovating a section of his house, a back room that had been half-used storage, half-intended guest room, fully neither, and Claire had come by to see the progress and had stood in the doorway of the room and said, without quite looking at him, "Is this the room you mentioned? The one you were thinking about?" He looked at the room. He looked at her. I wasn't thinking about it for any specific purpose," he said, which was technically true and also completely evasive, and she knew him well enough to know it immediately. Noah. Just his name. In the tone that meant, "I am giving you a chance to tell me the truth before I tell you I already know it." He exhaled. "I was thinking about it as an office," he said. "A home office. For someone who brings a lot of work home." She turned from the doorway and looked at him, fully. "Someone, you." She was quiet. He held himself steady. "You weren't going to tell me," she said. "I was working up to it," he said. "That's the same thing," she said. "When you work up to something, instead of just saying it, that's you managing the moment. That's you deciding how and when I receive information." Her voice wasn't angry. It was more tired than angry, which was worse. "We talked about this." "I know," he said. "We literally talked about this specific thing. In the bookstore. 3 weeks ago." "I know, Claire." Then, why she stopped. Pressed her hand flat against the doorframe. Why is it still the first response? To manage it. He thought about it for a real moment. Not the defensive version. The honest version, because, he said slowly, the fear is faster than the decision. I feel the fear first of your reaction, of seeming presumptuous, of getting ahead of where we actually are, and by the time I've processed it, I've already shaped the thing into something smaller to show you. She looked at him for a long time. "Okay," she said. "That's honest." "I'm trying," he said. "I am actually trying. It's just the reflex is older than the trying." "I know," she said. Some of the tension went out of her posture. "I know it is." She looked back at the room. "Is it a good size for an office?" Something moved through him that was relief, and something warmer underneath the relief. "Yeah," he said. "Good light. Quiet enough. I was going to put a proper desk in." "I have a desk," she said. "I know you have a desk. I've seen your desk. It's held together with approximately 6 textbooks and optimism." She laughed. Real and sudden, the laugh that always caught him off guard even after all this time. "That desk is structurally sound," she said. "It is not structurally sound, Claire. I am a builder. I know what structurally sound looks like." "Well," she said, still smiling, "maybe you can look at it." "I've already looked at it," he said, quietly, from across the room. "I didn't say anything because I was working up to it." She shook her head slowly, but she was still smiling. "You're a disaster," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "But I'm a disaster who is telling you about it, instead of fixing it without your knowledge." "Progress," she said. "Measurable progress," he agreed. She came away from the doorframe and stood beside him, looking at the room. Their shoulders touched. He did not make anything of it. He just stayed. The way he was learning to stay present without performing, close without calculating, there because there was where he wanted to be, and he was finally, slowly, learning how to say so. "I like it," she said after a moment. "The room." "Yeah?" "Yeah," she glanced at him sideways. "You should put the desk in." "My desk or mine is fine," she said. "Structurally sound or not?" He smiled. He looked at the room and thought about her desk in it, her papers and her student files, and her color-coded planners that she claimed weren't color-coded, and very much were, and he thought about evenings like the kitchen table evening, multiplied, extended into a future that he had, until very recently, been too careful to imagine clearly. He said, "Claire." I love you," he said. No setup, no context, no joke and no armor. Just the sentence offered directly, in a half-renovated room on a Wednesday afternoon with nothing dramatic attached to it. She turned to look at him. Her expression was open, in the way that still required a second to adjust to, after 11 years of seeing her more guarded. "I love you too," she said, with the same directness, the same absence of performance. They stood there for a moment in the room that was becoming something. Then Claire said, "That desk really is terrible, Noah. I've always known it was terrible." He laughed. She laughed. And they stood in the room together, in the middle of an ordinary Wednesday, and it was the most complete thing he had felt in 11 years of carefully not feeling it. The Portland program officially launched on a Monday morning in early February, and Claire Morgan did not sleep the night before. Not because she was unprepared. She had been preparing for 6 months, since before she'd even officially accepted the role. Since the first time, she'd sketched the framework on a notepad during her lunch break and realized she was designing something she actually believed in. The curriculum was solid. The staff she'd assembled were good people who understood what they were building and why. The district liaison had been cooperative beyond her initial expectations. Everything was as ready as a new program could be. She didn't sleep because of one specific thing. There was a student named Tyler. Tyler was 13. Quiet, in the particular way of kids who have learned that drawing attention to themselves does not reliably produce good outcomes. He'd been on Claire's radar since October, referred to her by a history teacher who'd noticed that Tyler was consistently exhausted and increasingly disengaged, not in the dramatic act-out way that gets noticed immediately, but in the slow fading way that is somehow easier to miss. Claire had learned, over 4 careful conversations, that Tyler's mother had been diagnosed with early-onset MS 18 months earlier, that Tyler was functionally managing the household, that he was grocery shopping and managing medications and making sure his younger sister got to school on time, all while maintaining a C average because he was spending his limited remaining energy on being invisible so nobody would ask questions he didn't know how to answer. Tyler was the reason the Portland program existed in the form it existed. Not just him, there were 11 other students in the initial cohort, each carrying some version of the same invisible weight. But Tyler was the one Claire had been thinking about when she wrote the program's core philosophy, the sentence that had become the internal compass for everything. Real support begins by seeing what a child is already carrying, not by assuming they have capacity to carry more. She had read that sentence to Noah at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night 3 weeks ago. He had been sitting on the couch with his own paperwork, and she had read it aloud from her laptop, and he had looked up and said simply, "That's it. That's the whole thing. It's not too much," she'd said. "Claire," he'd said, "it's exactly enough." She'd saved the document and closed the laptop and leaned against his arm and not said anything else, because nothing else was needed. Now it was 5:30 in the morning on a Monday, and she was lying in the dark in Noah's back room. Her desk was in there. Now the terrible one, exactly as described, reinforced by Noah, with a level of structural finish he maintained was routine, and she maintained was excessive, and she was not sleeping, and she was thinking about Tyler and about everything the program needed to be for him and for the 11 others, and for every kid after them who would walk into that counseling space and need someone who had already thought carefully about exactly what they were carrying. At 5:47 her phone buzzed. Noah, from 2 rooms away. "You're awake." She typed back, "How do you know, Noah?" "Because you go quiet when you sleep and you've been very still for 3 hours in a way that is not the same as quiet." She stared at that text for a moment. The fact that he knew the difference between her sleeping stillness and her wakeful stillness, that he had cataloged that distinction without trying to, simply by paying attention, was the kind of thing that used to make her chest ache with something she hadn't let herself name and now just made her feel held, in the specific way that accurate attention holds people. And she typed, "I'm thinking about Tyler." He typed back immediately, "Tell me about Tyler." So she did. At 5:47 in the morning, in a text thread between two rooms of the same house, she told Noah about Tyler, the exhaustion and the grocery shopping and the medication management and the C average and the careful invisibility. And Noah read every word and typed back, "He's going to know someone sees him today. Because of what you built." That's real, Claire. She put the phone on her chest and looked at the ceilings and breathed. At 6:15 she got up. She made coffee. Noah appeared in the kitchen at 6:30, dressed, which surprised her because he didn't have to be on site until 8:30. "You didn't have to get up," she said. "I know," he said. He poured himself coffee. He sat at the kitchen table. She sat across from him. They drank coffee in the early morning, quiet the way people drink coffee when they have been sharing mornings, long enough that the silence is a form of company rather than absence. At 7, she stood up and said, "Okay, I have to go." He stood too. He looked at her across the table with the expression she'd come to think of as his real one, not the managed, careful expression that had been his default for years, but the one underneath it, the one that was simply and completely present. "You built something real," he said. "Go show them." She rounded the table. She kissed him once. Deliberate and grounding, the kind of kiss that says, "I am here, and you are here, and that is a thing I do not take for granted." Then she picked up her bag and her coffee and walked out the door. He stood in the kitchen after she left and listened to her car back out of the driveway and felt the particular quality of missing someone who will be back, which is entirely different from missing someone whose return is uncertain, and thought, "This is it. This specific, ordinary, irreplaceable morning is the thing I would have traded away if I had kept being careful." He was glad he had stopped being careful. The program launch went well. More than well. The counseling space itself, the former storage room that Noah's crew had renovated over 6 weeks, after Claire had described what she needed, and Noah had asked 17 questions and taken 4 pages of notes, and built exactly what she'd described without adding anything she hadn't asked for, which Claire had noted with quiet precision, and thanked him for, specifically felt like the kind of room that understood its purpose. Warm without being precious, calm without being clinical. There were books on a low shelf. There were 2 chairs that were not opposite each other, but angled slightly, the way chairs are when they're designed for conversation rather than interview. There was a small table with a plant that Claire had bought herself, and Noah had quietly repotted into a better container without mentioning it. Tyler walked in at 10:15 for his first official session. He sat in the angled chair. He looked at the room for a moment, taking it in, the way kids who are used to institutional spaces take in a room that doesn't look institutional. And then he looked at Claire and said, "This is different from the other counselor's office." "Good different or bad different?" she said. He thought about it. "It doesn't feel like I'm in trouble," he said. "You're not in trouble," she said. "You're never in trouble in here. This room is for the stuff that's too heavy to carry by yourself." He looked at her. 13 years old, carrying 18 months of invisible weight, and somebody had just named the shape of it out loud without asking him to justify it first. His jaw worked for a moment. Then he said, "Okay." That was all. Just okay. But Claire had been doing this long enough to know that okay, from a kid who has been managing alone, is one of the most significant words in the language. She texted Noah at noon. Tyler said okay. Noah texted back in 30 seconds, "That's everything." She smiled at her phone in the empty counseling room and thought, yes, that is exactly everything. Rachel's wedding was on a Saturday in late March, 6 months after the engagement party, where a garlic knot had changed the entire direction of 2 people's lives. It was a good wedding. Not elaborate. Rachel and her now husband James were people who valued substance over spectacle, which Noah had always considered one of his sister's better qualities, but warm and specific, and full of the kind of details that told you it had been planned by people who knew what they actually wanted. The venue was a renovated farmhouse 40 minutes outside the city. The food was exceptional. The dancing started early and did not stop. Noah and Claire arrived together. This was not new. They had arrived together at every event for 11 years. But the way they arrived together was different. There was no calibrated distance, no careful management of how they stood relative to each other. They walked in with her hand in his, and it was not performed, and it was not a statement. It was simply what they were. Rachel's future mother-in-law saw them come through the door and said, immediately, to the woman beside her, "I knew they were married. I said so at the engagement party." The woman beside her said, "They're not married, Barbara." And Barbara said, "Well, they should be," with the confidence of someone who has made a correct assessment and intends to be recognized for it. Rachel, who overheard this, caught Claire's eye across the room and grinned. The ceremony was brief and sincere. James cried when Rachel walked in, which Rachel had predicted he would do and had prepared for by crying first, preemptively, before she reached the aisle, which meant by the time she got to him they were both already emotional and could be emotional together without either of them feeling exposed. Noah watched this and thought, that's what it looks like. Crying first, so the other person doesn't have to be vulnerable alone. He stored it away in the part of himself that was still learning. At the reception they danced. Claire was a better dancer than Noah and had never pretended otherwise. And he had spent 11 years pretending to be worse he was, because watching her correct his form was one of the specific joys he had allowed himself without acknowledging why. Tonight he danced without pretending, which meant they were more evenly matched than she'd expected, and she stopped in the middle of a song and looked at him and said, "You've been sandbagging for a decade. I have no idea what you're talking about," he said. "You are an absolutely competent dancer." "I'm a disaster," he said. "You've always said so." "Noah, would you like me to step on your foot?" "I can step on your foot. For authenticity." She laughed and shook her head and kept dancing, and he danced with her, and Rachel saw them from across the room and felt something complete in a way she hadn't expected to feel at her own wedding, the specific satisfaction of watching two people she loved stop making a complicated thing out of a simple one. The dinner was where the twist arrived. The one nobody saw coming. Not even Dana, who had been watching table with the alertness of someone who expected interesting things to happen and was rarely disappointed. It was during the toasts. Noah was giving one. He had written it 3 weeks ago and revised it twice, and Claire had read the final version and said it was perfect, which it was warm and funny and precisely calibrated to Rachel's particular brand of sentiment, which required humor or it became intolerable. He stood up with his glass and delivered it cleanly, and the table laughed at the right moments, and Rachel cried at the right moment, and James shook his hand afterward with both hands and genuine feeling. And then Linda stood up. Nobody had asked Linda to give a toast. Linda had not been on the program. Linda was there as Claire's mother and Noah's long-adopted supplementary family member, and she had a glass of sparkling water because she was still managing her medications carefully, and she stood up with it, and the table went slightly quiet because Linda had a quality of presence that produced quiet. She said, "I'm not on the list. Forgive an old woman." She looked at Rachel. "Your brother built my daughter's desk." A pause. "Not the one in her office. The one in his house. He rebuilt it without being asked, without mentioning it. Just quietly made it sturdy enough to last, because he saw it was failing and he knew she needed it, and he wanted her to have something solid to work at." She paused. "That is the smallest version of what he does for her. The day-to-day version. And I have been watching him do the larger versions for 10 years. She looked at Noah. "You asked me once if you'd take care of her. And you said you'd take care of each other. That was the right answer." She lifted her glass. "To Rachel and James. And since I'm already up to the people in this room who finally stopped being afraid of the right thing." She sat down. The table erupted not in the polished, reception-appropriate way, but in the loose, genuine way of people who have been moved by something true and are not bothering to compose their reactions. Dana was making no effort to conceal that she was crying. Rachel had reached across the table and taken Claire's hand. James was laughing in the slightly overwhelmed way of someone who has just understood something about his new family. Noah sat very still. Claire found his hand under the table. She didn't say anything. She just found it and held it, and he held back. And Linda caught his eye from 2 seats down and gave him a look that was small and entirely sufficient. Later that night, after the dancing had wound down and the farmhouse had gone quieter, and most of the guests had started drifting toward their cars, Noah and Claire found themselves sitting outside on a low wooden fence at the edge of the property. Still in their wedding clothes, shoes off because the grass was dry and the night was warm enough, and they had both independently decided that shoes were no longer necessary at 11:15 at night, after 6 hours of a wedding. The stars were doing what stars do when you're 40 minutes outside the city and not thinking about anything that requires a screen. Claire had her head slightly tilted back and her eyes half closed, and she looked like someone who had stopped managing their own comfort for the evening and was simply occupying it. Noah looked at her. He had something he wanted to say. He had been carrying it for about 3 weeks. In the specific way you carry something, you are not ready to say until you are. And he was ready now. He knew he was ready because he did not feel the urge to manage how it landed. He just wanted to say it. "I want to ask you something," he said. She tilted her head toward him. "Okay, not as a plan," he said. "Not as a logistics conversation. Just as a question that you can answer however you want, including not at all tonight." She turned to look at him fully. The ease that had been in her face was still there, but with something attentive underneath it now. "Ask," she said. He held her gaze. He did not look away to find the words. He had the words. He'd had them for a while. "I want to stop having a room that's yours in my house," he said. "I want it to just be the house. Yours and mine together. And I want to know if that's something you want, not because it's logical, not because the lease math works out, not because it's the next practical step, because you want it, because this is where you want to be." The silence after it was the good kind. The kind that means someone is taking a question seriously instead of deflecting it. Claire looked at him for a long moment. "You're not asking me to move in," she said slowly. "You're asking if I want to." "Yes," he said. "That is the distinction I am trying to make." "Because there's a difference," she said, "between being asked to do something and being asked if you want it." "Yes," he said again. She was quiet for another moment. He let her have it. "I've been leaving a toothbrush there for 6 weeks," she said. "I know. And approximately 40% of my wardrobe. I've noticed. And the terrible desk. The structurally reinforced desk," he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. She looked at the sky for a moment, then back at him. "Yes," she said. "I want it. Not because it's practical, although it is. And I'm not going to pretend the lease math doesn't occur to me because, you know, I've run the numbers, but because that house feels like the right place to be. It has felt like the right place to be for a while." She paused. "I was waiting for you to ask." "You could have asked me," he said. "I know," she said. "I was giving you the chance to do it without prompting, because I knew you were working up to it, and I wanted you to get there yourself." He stared at her. "You were managing me," he said. "I was giving you room," she said with great dignity. "That's the same thing. It's a lighter version of the same thing." He looked at her for a moment. Then he laughed. The real one, the unrehearsed one, the one that came from somewhere that did not require management. She laughed too, and they sat on the fence in the warm March night, in their wedding clothes with their shoes off, laughing at themselves and at each other, and at 11 years of two, very careful people giving each other room in every direction, except the one that mattered. When the laughing settled, she leaned into him, her shoulder against his arm, her head finding the familiar angle. He put his arm around her. "So that's a yes," he said. "That's a very definite yes," she said. "Okay." A comfortable silence, the kind that no longer needed filling. Then she said, "Noah. Are you happy?" He thought about it. Not the reflexive version. The real version, checking in with himself the way he was still learning to do, the way she had been slowly, patiently teaching him to do, without ever making it a lesson. He checked in. He found what was there. "Yes," he said. "Genuinely and specifically happy. Not as a performance. Not as a managed state." He paused. "It's a little bit terrifying." "I know," she said. "But it's real, he agreed. She was quiet for a moment. "Then, I'm going to steal your pillow," she said. "When I move in. Full time. I'm going to steal your pillow, and there's nothing you can do about it. I have 2 pillows. I'll steal both of them. Claire. And I'm going to put more plants in the kitchen. The kitchen doesn't have enough light for plants. I'll get grow lights. That is an over-engineered solution to a problem that doesn't exist. And I'm going to start buying the yellow tomatoes." He stopped. He looked at her. She was looking up at him with a completely straight face that was approximately 7% straight and 93% suppressed amusement. And he thought, 11 years. 11 years of this exact face, and he had never let himself understand what it was doing to him. "You hate yellow tomatoes," he said. "I don't hate them," she said. "I've always thought they were worth the premium. I just argued otherwise, because you liked being right about them." He stared at her. "You have been letting me be right about yellow tomatoes. For at least 6 years," she said serenely. "That's Claire, that's information manipulation. It's relationship management, she said. I was giving you room. He pressed his hand over his face. She started laughing properly this time, the full laugh, the one that did not require an audience or an excuse, and it echoed out into the warm March night, and he pulled her closer without meaning to, and she let him without remarking on it, because that was also just what they were now. 6 months later, on a Saturday evening in September, almost exactly 1 year after Rachel's engagement party, the same crowd gathered again. Same people, different location, Noah's house, which had been renovated through the summer, with the particular care of someone making a space for two instead of one, and which looked like exactly what it was, a home that had been built for a life that finally knew what it wanted to contain. Rachel and James had come in from the coast for the weekend. Dana was there with her new person, a quiet landscape architect named Peter who had survived Dana's vetting process and therefore had Noah's immediate respect. Linda was there, moving through the house with the easy familiarity of someone who had been coming here for years, which she had just in a different capacity. A handful of friends filled the rest of the rooms, some of them people who had been at the engagement party a year ago, some of them new additions, all of them part of the specific constellation that two people accumulate when they stop holding their lives at careful distance from everyone who might matter. The dinner was happening in the kitchen and the living room and spilling out the back because the evening was warm and the door was open and nobody felt like staying in one room. There was too much food, which was Noah's doing, and the wine was Claire's selection. And the combination had produced the kind of party that nobody wants to leave, because the leaving would require and acknowledge that this particular collection of people in this particular space, at this particular moment, is temporary. Claire was in the kitchen with Rachel and Linda when it happened. She was reaching for something on the counter, the good serving plate, the one Noah's grandmother had left him, that they'd been using for the garlic bread, and she found the plate already occupied by a single garlic knot, sitting in the center of it, alone, with a post-it note attached to it in Noah's handwriting. The note said, "Don't even think about it." She stared at it. Then she started laughing. Rachel looked over her shoulder and read the note and said, "Oh no, is this what I think it is?" And Claire said, "He remembered." And Linda said, "Of course he remembered," with the satisfaction of a woman who had never doubted this particular outcome. Claire picked up the garlic knot. She walked out of the kitchen, into the living room where Noah was in the middle of a conversation with James and Dana's Peter about something structural and important sounding, which he always managed to be in the middle of at parties. He saw her coming. He saw the garlic knot in her hand. His face did the thing that was not the managed expression, not the careful expression, but the real one, the underneath one, the one that he'd been showing her with increasing frequency since the night on a front porch in September when she'd asked him to say it again. "Don't," he said. "Don't what?" She said. "Don't eat that garlic knot." "I found it on a plate," she said, unattended. It was attended. There was a note. The note said, "Don't think about it." I already thought about it. The prohibition came too late. The living room had gone quiet. Dana was watching with undisguised delight. Rachel had appeared in the doorway from the kitchen, with Linda just behind her. James had wisely stepped back to give the scene appropriate framing. Noah pointed at her, very deliberately, with the specific gravity of a man who has been here before and knows exactly how this goes. "I love you," he said, "and if you eat that garlic knot, we are going to need counseling." The room erupted. The same laughter, the same warmth, the same well-worn theater of it, except that this time nothing underneath it was careful. Nothing underneath it was managed or concealed, or held at protective distance. The joke was the same. Everything else was different. Claire's cheeks went red. The same red as a year ago on a back porch in September. The same particular flush that had nothing to do with embarrassment, and everything to do with something far more honest. She stepped toward him. One step. Enough to make it clear this was not a public moment anymore, just theirs. "What?" she said, quiet. Just for him. He held her gaze. He knew what she was asking. He had known for a year. He would know for every year after this one. He took her hand, her free hand, the one not holding the garlic knot she was absolutely about to eat, and he held it in front of everyone in the room, without any of the old calculation, without measuring the degree of the gesture against the safety of the distance. He just held it. "Present. I love you," he said. Not as a joke. Not as a Not only when life is convenient, or when I'm feeling brave, or when I've managed to silence the part of me that's afraid of what it means to say it clearly. He looked at her with the expression he'd stopped trying to calibrate. I love you on the ordinary Tuesdays and the hard Wednesdays, and every morning I wake up before you and hear how quiet the house is when you're still asleep in it. I love you the same way I did for 11 years, and differently, because now I'm not hiding it inside something else. He paused. I choose you, Claire. Not as a fallback and not as the safe option. As the actual choice. The one I keep making every day because it is the right one. The room was completely silent. Claire looked at him. Her eyes were bright, in the way that had stopped being something she managed. The garlic knot was still in her hand. A year ago she had asked him to say it again because she needed to know if it was real. She knew now. She had known for a while. But she let him say it because he had earned the saying of it, and because this was the truth of them, not the dramatic version, not the cleaned-up version, but this. Two people in a kitchen warm house in September, surrounded by everyone they loved, who had spent 11 years in the same orbit and finally stopped pretending that orbit was anything other than home. She leaned up and kissed him. The room did not erupt this time. It exhaled. The specific exhale of people who have been waiting for something to resolve and have just watched it resolve completely. Rachel made a sound that was not quite a word. Dana said, quietly but audibly, finally. Linda said nothing at all, which was the most complete response of all. When Claire pulled back, she looked at him. She stole the garlic knot, ate it, immediately, with complete composure, while maintaining full eye contact. Noah stared at her. I said, don't eat it. I heard you, she said. There was a note. There was, she agreed. It was very clear. I chose to proceed anyway. You are impossible, he said. You love me, she said. I just said that, he said. Say it again, she said. And the room laughed. And Linda covered her mouth with one hand. And Rachel grabbed James's arm. And Noah shook his head with the helpless precision of who has finally stopped being careful about the things that matter and has discovered, on the other side of the careful, that this specific, impossible, infuriating, wonderful woman in his kitchen, eating his garlic knot and asking him to say it, and is exactly what he had been building toward for 11 years, without quite knowing the name of what he was building. I love you, Claire, he said. For the 100th time. For the first time, every time. She stole the rest of the bread from the plate on the counter, without breaking eye contact. He did not stop her. He was never going to stop her. That was the story. Not the version where silence was protection, or where love meant deciding things alone, or where showing up for someone required hiding what you felt about them. Not the version where 11 years of careful restraint was noble, or romantic, or anything other than what it was: two people standing outside a life they both wanted, too afraid of losing each other to understand that they were the only ones keeping themselves out. The real version was simpler. It was a garlic knot, and a joke that wasn't a joke. And a woman who asked him to say it again because she needed to know if he meant it. It was a man who had spent 11 years loving someone from the safe side of silence, finally understanding that the silence was not keeping her. It was two people sitting in a bookstore, and a diner, and a half-finished room, and a kid at 11 o'clock at night, learning to say the hard thing instead of performing the easy one. It was the choice made daily, not to disappear behind something noble. It was Noah Bennett standing in his own kitchen a year after the worst and best moment of his life, holding Claire Morgan's hand in front of everyone who mattered, saying the true thing without a single layer of armor between him and the saying of it. The joke was never the confession. Claire had always been the truth, and this time, finally, he had stopped hiding inside the punchline long enough to let her see it.